All right, today we're jumping headfirst into a 1,500-year-old debate. It's all about sacred space, ritual, and a question that might just change how you think about holiness itself. Okay, so here's a question for you. Is holier always better? I mean, it sounds simple, right? If you're supposed to do something in a holy place, doing it in an even holier place has got to be an upgrade. But what if it's not? That little puzzle is the key to unlocking this brilliant, ancient intellectual mystery.
So, to get our heads around this, we need to picture the ancient temple in Jerusalem. For the rabbis of the Talmud, this wasn't just some building. Think of it more like a precisely calibrated system, a series of spaces where each one had its own unique level of sanctity and its own specific set of rules.
And the whole thing kicks off with one very specific ritual. We're going to treat this like a detective case, following the clues piece by piece to see how what seems like a simple problem actually reveals a profoundly deep logic.
Okay, so here's the scene. A priest needs to perform a key part of a meal offering, a ritual called taking the handful. Now, the rule book says this is supposed to happen out in the temple courtyard, but what if he does it inside the inner sanctuary instead, a place with a much, much higher level of holiness? Is the offering still good? Is holier actually better here?
So, the first answer we get seems to wrap this all up nice and neat. A sage named Rabbi Elazar weighs in and says, yep, it's perfectly valid. Great, so case closed? Well, as you might know, in a Talmudic debate, the first answer is almost never the final word.
And bam, just when we thought we had it figured out, someone throws a wrench in the works. Another sage, Rabbi Yirmiyah, brings a piece of counter-evidence to the table, a sacred text that seems to say the exact opposite.
So, Rabbi Yirmiyah quotes this interpretation of a verse from Leviticus. It says the handful has to be taken from the place where the feet of the non-priest may stand. Now, that phrase isn't just descriptive, it's a very specific legal term for the temple courtyard. It was the one place non-priests could go. So this sounds like a direct order. Do it here and only here.
Okay, now we've got a real head-scratcher, a direct contradiction. Rabbi Elazar says the holier spot is fine, but this verse seems to draw a clear line, saying only the courtyard will do. They can't both be right. This forces a much deeper question. If this verse isn't a do not enter sign for the sanctuary, then what on earth is it for? What is it actually trying to teach us?
And to figure this out, the Talmud does something amazing. It takes us on this wild logical detour. It's basically a process of elimination on steroids, designed to test every single possible meaning of that verse until only one logical answer is left standing. Let's walk through it.
So how do they crack this? Well, they start with a theory. Maybe the verse isn't about forbidding the sanctuary at all. Maybe it's about permitting the ritual anywhere in the big courtyard, not just one specific corner. But to prove that, they have to shoot down every other idea. They say, well, can we compare it to a burnt offering? Nope, that's different. It gets totally burned up. How about a sin offering? Nah, that's for more serious stuff. They go through every comparison, and after methodically knocking down every other possibility, they realize their first theory was the only one that worked. The verse's real job is to give flexibility inside the courtyard, not to build a wall around it. And just like that, the objection just evaporates. Rabbi Yirmiyah's counter-evidence has been totally reframed, and Rabbi Elazar's original ruling is back on top. Doing the ritual in the holier sanctuary is, in fact, totally fine. But what's so cool is that this whole deep dive wasn't just about winning an argument. It accidentally uncovered this huge underlying principle about how holiness and sacred space actually work.
And this is where another sage, Rabbi Yohanan, steps in. He takes this big, kind of fuzzy idea they've been wrestling with and just crystallizes it into one beautiful, simple rule that seems to explain everything.
And here it is. A minor area should not be more stringent than a major one. Wow. I mean, that's just so clean, so elegant, right? It just makes sense. If you're allowed to do something in a less holy place, the minor area, then it stands to reason you should definitely be allowed to do it in a more holy place, the major one. The rules travel up the ladder of holiness.
So you'd think, okay, we found it, the master key that unlocks everything. This principle seems perfect. But nope, this is the Talmud we're talking about. The moment you think you have a perfect, universal rule, it hits you with a test case to see if it breaks.
And this final twist is all about the difference between a ritual of service and an act of, well, eating. And trust me, this is where it gets really fascinating.
So here's the curveball.
The case of the priests eating their share of the holy offerings. They usually do this in the courtyard. But we learn that a special verse from the Torah is required to let them eat in the sanctuary, and even then, only in an emergency. Now wait a second, hold on. If that big, beautiful principle we just learned is always true, why in the world would you need a special permission slip? Shouldn't it just be allowed by default?
The very existence of that verse is the smoking gun. It proves the principle has a limit, and the reason why, well, it's profound. It all boils down to this really human idea, the logic of respect, and how you should behave in the presence of your master.
And this is where it all clicks into place. Think about it. Sacrificial service, like taking that handful of grain, is a form of work for God. It's considered totally respectful to do your job for your boss anywhere, even in their most private office, right? So the principle applies. But eating, that's different. That's for your personal benefit. And it can be seen as kind of disrespectful to just start munching on your lunch in your boss's private office without being explicitly invited. So in that case, the principle does not apply, and you need that special verse, that explicit permission.
So let's just step back for a second. What a journey, right? We started with what seemed like a tiny legal question about location, and we ended up uncovering this deep ethical framework about behavior, function, and respect.
This whole process just shows us that Talmudic law isn't some dusty old rulebook. It's this incredibly alive, dynamic process of debate and discovery. We saw how every single word of a text is put under a microscope. And we found out that in a sacred space, what you're doing can be every bit as important as where you're doing it. Holiness, it turns out, is deeply tied to these very human ideas of respect, service, and proper behavior.
So this ancient argument leaves us with a really modern question, doesn't it? It's not just about temples and offerings, it's about our own lives. How do our actions and our sense of appropriateness change depending on where we are and who we're with? And what does it really mean to build our spaces and our relationships not just on rules, but on this deep and nuanced principle of respect?